Welcome once again to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. It has been mentioned several times on this podcast recently that 2026 is a special one in terms of the sports calendar. On the day we record this episode on Friday, January 23rd, we are exactly 14 days away from the opening ceremony for the 2026 Winter Olympic Games of Milan, Cortina, Italy. And we are exactly 16 days away from the 60th edition of the Super Bowl. Also later this year, soccer fans from around the globe will be laser focused on footy pitches in Canada, Mexico, and the United States for the FIFA World Cup men's tournament. So it's the best of times for consumers of sport and a very, very busy time for bettors of sport. eMarketer, which delivers coverage across the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific on matters of marketing, advertising, and commerce, has published a new report with the help of Vividata, which focuses on the habits of today's Canadian sports consumers. That consumption, of course, is fueled by leagues, streaming, television, and betting apps. To help us dig a little deeper into the data, we say greetings and salutations to eMarketer's Senior Principal Analyst for Canada, Paul Briggs. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. It's good to be here. And I agree totally. 2026 is going to be a massive year for sports audiences and for the way they consume content in all forms. There's just a lot going on. I'm looking forward to the Olympics. I'm looking forward to the World Cup being in Canada and North America. And maybe there'll be a Toronto Blue Jays run in the postseason again. But it's a great time. 2026 is sort of a real inflection point in terms of sports media, and happy to talk about it with you today.
Hey, Paul, before we get going, I'm going to get you in advance to accept my apology if I call you Dave in recognition of the author of the Gaming News Canada newsletter. You mentioned off camera that you have a brother Dave, so it makes me feel a little better if I do screw up here.
Yeah, no problem at all. No, I think the last name Briggs isn't all that common, so when you come across another person with that surname, it's pretty unique.
Hey, Paul, I want to begin. Like, you've been working in the market research game for almost 30 years now, looking at real estate and investing and economics. I just wonder, and I think I know the answer, but, spending a time on a report around the consumption habits of sports fans and bettors, I'm thinking that may be a bit of an enjoyable distraction from your usual work.
Yeah, it really is. So, eMarketer, we really focus on media and advertising, around the world. We also focus on retail e-commerce. Really, the whole digital transformation of the economy in all its manifestations is really what we're plugged into. We have forecasts that highlight the amount of change or the rapid pace of change that's happening in all these areas. So what we heard is that sports is a hot topic. Again, we mentioned 2026 is a big year. A lot of our customers and brands are really looking at how can we tap into that sports audience. It's a very lucrative audience. Look, if you look at the price of tickets to go to games live, these are fairly well-off people in many cases. So it's a lucrative audience. So what we're hearing from the people who consume our content is that they want more about sports. And that's why we partnered with Vividata to come up with a report that really kind of showed the state of play in Canada when it comes to sports consumption, and also, how people are using sports betting apps and all sorts of other behaviors around the sporting ecosystem.
Paul, for the people who might be unfamiliar with the work that eMarketer and the work that Vividata does, can you maybe just explain how this report was pulled together, how the data all came together?
Sure. This was a little bit of a different approach. We are partnering with Vividata in Canada to release these reports. A lot of the eMarketer reports that most people are familiar with come from our own proprietary forecasts and research on a given topic. It could be ad spending in digital media. It could be retail sales, e-commerce in Canada, how that compares to total retail. This particular report is solely reliant on Vividata's study of the Canadian consumer report. So it has an ongoing panel in Canada, tens of thousands of people, and they do have a subsection of that database really looking at behaviors around sports consumption and what that may mean for things like sporting apps and or betting apps and fantasy and that sort of thing. So we took the Vividata database, and then we applied eMarketer analysis to the findings, and that's what the report really digs into.
It's there's content that, it's so true. Content is king in today's world, and there's just so much access to content, whether it's news, entertainment, music, concerts, movies, documentaries, series on streaming services. But it still feels like sports is still kind of at the top of that list, and especially live sports.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of appointment viewing. So live sports, when there's a game on at 7:15 on a weeknight, if it's the Jays, or if it's 7 o'clock for a lot of the NHL games, people want to watch it live, right? With other content, you can watch it on demand. So I think that live nature of sporting events and the fact that people want to consume it live, they don't want to have to put their phone away and watch something that's recorded, because a lot of times people are consuming live sports in addition to scrolling social media or talking with their friends in a group chat. So a lot of that sort of multitasking that goes around with live sports really is conducive to live consumption of that sport. So I think we are looking at, obviously, our US forecasts for ad spending are a little bit deeper than what we have in Canada. I was talking to some of our forecasters regarding an upcoming sports advertising ad forecast for the US, which is coming out later this year, and how much sports really factors into ad spend. And in terms of like just one stat that one of my forecasters shared with me was that in 2023, more than 90 of the top rated programs were live sports compared to the rest of what's available on TV. A lot of that is NFL, to be honest, but still, live sports is really that appointment viewing place to be, and it will continue to be.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that's been a constant with the NFL, right, Paul? Like, there's still good ratings for Monday Night Football, still very strong ratings on Sundays, and the NFL is really still kind of the not only the first league, but the league that really got that appointment viewing, and adding the Sunday night game and now the Thursday night game, that they've hit all the right chords when it comes to tapping into that appointment viewing audience.
Yeah, for sure. I think the NFL is probably the preeminent example of monetizing an audience for live TV. It's true. I come the end of the NFL season, it seems like there's a game on, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Maybe not Fridays, but I know earlier in the fall they don't want to mess with the college football audience, so they typically stay away from Saturday games, but they start doing those Saturday games towards the end of the season, I think, right? So, and certainly in the playoffs. So, the NFL has sort of, especially in the US, has really set the standard.
Oh, this podcast, we usually focus on the business of sports betting and gaming, but from time to time, as I think I mentioned it before I hit the record button, we like to wade into just the business of sports and sports media, and having you on today makes a lot of sense, because in some of the conferences I've attended over the last 5 years covering the industry, I've heard from executives from the NHL, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the PGA Tour, and they talk about that there's a definite connection, and they've seen an increase in engagement with their broadcast because of sports betting, and obviously the overturning of PASPA back in 2018, and then the opening of the Ontario market in 2022, and now we have Alberta on the horizon of following the Ontario model later this year. That those sports executives, they say there's a correlation to people watching games, staying with games, or tuning into different games, especially with the NFL on a Sunday afternoon. Did you get a hint of that from going through the results of this report?
I think it was certainly inferred by the results. What we didn't have, and a lot of this, I think, has a lot to do with age demographics, to be honest. I think all leagues a decade or more ago were trying to figure out how to stem the losses of live audiences, which seemed to be apparent at the time. Younger audiences now, we call them Gen Z, obviously with the ability to have digital consumption of the content, whether it be live or in packaged up highlights, or having a betting extension to the experience, I think was central to the strategy for these leagues in being able to attract younger viewers. I think that's not news to anybody. So I think that strategy has really played out over the last decade. It certainly has played over the last couple of years in Ontario. And we're seeing, you just look at any sports that you consume on live TV, and it's full of ads for sports books and a variety of betting apps. So I think it's central to the strategy of these leagues. The NFL sort of was the first league to really embrace, the betting culture in fantasy sports, but I think that's now extended to every major North American sport and global sport, to be quite frank. If you look at what's happening with, the big football leagues in Europe, the same is obviously happening there. It has been for some time.
Yeah, we've seen the sports betting operators, Bet365, for example, will live stream European soccer and other sports on their app in some parts of the world. And we've seen with Sports Interaction where they've done shoulder programming, kind of studio content, almost like their versions of the Manning Cast around UFC events and big sporting events. So I think the sports betting operators have, FanDuel investing in the FanDuel Sports Network. So I think those betting companies have been trying to find their own lane in terms of tapping into those live sports audiences.
Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned Bet365. So so Bet365 in the Vividata polling came out as the sort of the most adopted betting app in Canada among sports fans. But what we found in that list was a highly fragmented space for apps to work in. So you have a mix of some Canadian players, including the provincial authorities that have betting apps. You've got a mix of European companies that are operating in Canada with their betting apps, and US companies like FanDuel and BetMGM. So you've got a real mix of European, US, homegrown sports books that are really vying for that audience. And I think there's a lot of room to grow for these apps. And as the appetite for sports betting continues to increase, that fragmented space will continue to grow to many more apps, I think, and unless we see some consolidation. That's not something that I have covered. Maybe you have, Steve, in terms of the potential consolidation of these players in the future, but that may be an outcome that is coming.
Yeah, I'll just quickly give the top 10 list, Paul, from the report, and that's Bet365, ProLine's at number 2, BetMGM, FanDuel, DraftKings, Betway, Bet99, 888 Sport, Play Alberta, and Miso Jeu. So it is interesting, but not surprising that 3 of the players on that list are provincial lottery and gaming corporations, because there has been brand awareness around ProLine and Play Alberta and Miso Jeu for more than 20 years now. So that's not really a surprise.
No, not at all. I think they were smart to shift their businesses to the digital ecosystem and create apps that allowed people to, instead of walking into a convenience store and placing your ProLine app, doing it from your phone. So that was a natural sort of next step for all those provincial gaming authorities.
Hey, I want to stick with some of the betting results for a few minutes, Paul, and that's from the report, like it said, about 1/3 of sports bettors are placing wagers weekly or more often, including 5% who bet daily. And I think the report mentions that those users are driving most of the revenues, and I think that's something that will be of a lot of interest to operators in the marketplace here.
Yeah, I think that was a key finding. Roughly 1/3 were frequent bettors, within that weekly time frame, and it just shows that it's a very highly engaged audience that will come back to it. And notwithstanding some of the risks involved in gaming and sort of associated addictions potentially for gambling, I think the industry is really trying to sort of limit their exposure to those type of risks. But still, a weekly habit doesn't seem to be too troubling. But I think what you're seeing is a lot of the revenue is happening with that core group of bettors and they will drive the industry forward, I think.
I think and again, this is looking at it from a simple point of view. I mean, we understand in Ontario about 85% of revenue that gaming operators are taking in the legal market now are from online casinos. So sports is about a little over 10% of the market now. But I think if you're someone who are trying to tell a story about responsible gaming, it is comforting is probably not the right word, but in the report, it mentions that nearly 2/3 of sports bettors are wagering under $50, and almost 40% wagering less than $20. And monthly spending shows about 54% of the respondents in this survey putting out less than $100. So that's encouraging sign to me, or at least an opportunity for a sports betting operator to tell a positive story around people playing responsibly.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think when I first saw that data, I wasn't sure what I was going to get in terms of frequency, in terms of dollar value, in terms of the degree of engagement and amount spent. And you're right. I think it does paint a picture of very responsible gaming overall in terms of the dollar values. And so I think that's a good news story for sure.
The other thing I found kind of interesting too, Paul, is that nearly a third of bettors are wagering in game, and that compares with about 26% on money lines and a little over 20% on point spreads. And it does also say that money lines and spreads still account for most of the betting activity. So, I think, does that suggest that perhaps the legal sports betting market is still young here, and that there are a lot of new sports bettors who really aren't tapping into the prop betting side of the business yet?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think on that list there was maybe 10 or so different varieties of bets that sports books and apps are really marketing to the public to try to increase engagement. Those traditional sort of betting lines are still predominant from what the data shows, but the key stat there was live betting. I think the idea to do a prop bet in game, specific to players, specific to outcomes, and have those odds shift on the fly, I think is, from an engagement standpoint, I think that really benefits the sports books and the operators in terms of having a committed audience, making sure that they're watching the game. I'll throw out a lot of it to engage with these bets that can surface at any moment.
Paul, was the report able to dig in at all into the advertising piece? I know there's a section on sponsorship, and I want to talk about that and live events in a second. But is there any insight around sports betting? And again, I'm sure you're not surprised I'm asking this, given that advertising by the gaming companies has been such a hot button topic, and of course there's a bill that's been put through the Senate to create a national framework around sports betting advertising across Canada. But did the report have any revelations into that?
Not in as much as looking at sports betting advertisers per se. It did look at consumer perceptions of sponsorship in sporting venues and sponsorship of sporting content, which we can talk about in a sec. But let's address that, that a point you made around anybody who watches a live Jays game or NHL game, or it's title sponsors are typically from the sports betting arena, and you're seeing a lot of it throughout the broadcast, if you will. So I think while we don't have numbers, and I know we're looking at in the US trying to quantify how much sports betting companies contribute to ad spend on sports content, we are digging into that data. It's not available at the moment. Anecdotally, it's a significant chunk. If you just look at how much real estate is being occupied by these companies, be it in on the rink boards, title sponsorships, 30-second spots during the broadcast, it's pretty blanket across the board. So while we don't have a firm number on how much they account for in total sports sponsorship, it's certainly a growing number and a number that's significant. Where we do in the report, where we do get into the idea of sponsorship in sports, is asking consumers, sports fans, and Vividata did this in their polling. What's their perception of sports advertisements, either on a broadcast, while you're at the stadium or rink. What's the impression of it? Do they have a positive impression of it, or a neutral impression? How likely are they to notice advertisers in that context? So there is quite a bit of data looking at fan perceptions of sports sponsorships, and what we found is that it's pretty high compared to other venues or other advertising paradigms. When you look at the sports context, I think it's safe to say that there's a highly engaged audience, and the sponsorship in sports is performing very well for advertisers.
Ready to accelerate your digital growth? Bede Gaming delivers a market-leading platform with best-in-class products driven by secure, cutting-edge technology. With an open API platform, robust integration suite, and unlimited configurability, you can achieve the ultimate end-to-end customization for your iGaming ambitions. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. I mean, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment's been very successful attracting sponsors from the legal gaming industry. I mean, announced a deal last year with Bede as an official online casino partner. PointsBet's been there from the beginning. FanDuel's been a partner. OLG's been a partner. And, for all the hand-wringing around ticket prices today, Paul, bottom line is, as I always tell people, there are 20,000 people inside the Scotiabank Arena to watch a Leafs game every Saturday night, and that's a very powerful place for a sponsor to be, and to have that access to customers for the better part of 2.5 to 3 hours, and you can see why sponsorship is still very attractive to companies, that regardless of the sector.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's what this report and the Vivid data shows, is that sports fans are pretty receptive to brands that are relevant to their experience as a sports fan. I think more broadly, more cultural sort of advertising, be it concerts or music festivals or what have you, those experiential contexts really deliver well for advertisers and sponsors. So that could be sports, that could be the other cultural pursuits like music and in the summer in Canada, going to festivals. All that performs very well for advertisers.
Yeah, and the report mentions that about 2/3 of the fans are likely to notice sponsors, and in-venue advertising is the biggest driver of that, but about 20% tune them out. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about, and finding brands, finding that interactivity and exclusivity, and being able to do something around an athlete or an entertainer. And we see some signs that I think outside the venue with Jurassic Park and Maple Leaf Square during the playoffs, where brands like OLG, for example, are able to have those pregame activations and offer people a special place to sit and watch a game, and I think so there's still opportunity there, and I think again that's just really the continuing evolution of sports sponsorship, and both brands and also the organizations, leagues, teams, whatever have you, trying to create those opportunities.
Yeah, you mentioned the sort of exterior of the stadium, like Jurassic Park or Maple Leaf Square. Like, what's the difference between the people that gather there versus the people that are in the seats? It's young people, it's Gen Z typically in those high experiential contexts, right? So for advertisers, that's a very lucrative audience. A young sports fan is very engaged and is a very targeted audience. So sponsoring of those events is very effective. But yeah, I notice that all the time when it comes to outside the stadium, who's actually screaming and yelling and happy when a goal goes in. If it's a hockey playoffs, for example, it's a bunch of Gen Z people and millennials going crazy. And that's not to say there isn't some people that are older, but generally speaking, it's a younger audience. Mm.
And you just like the in venue, Paul. You've got that audience. Like those people aren't moving; they're not going anywhere for 3 hours. So you have your attention inside that space for 180 180 minutes.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, when you look at, perception of advertising in other venues, like obviously when it comes to like internet advertising, the number of people who would use an ad blocker or attempt to block ads or tune them out completely is very, very high compared to what you would find in the case of the sports consumer in this report, which was much lower. Even with television, you can go when the 60-second television break for an NHL game. A lot of people, you go to the bathroom or go to the fridge, right? So I think that captive audience in stadium, and it was borne out in that data from Vividata regarding the effectiveness of sponsorships, definitely delivering results.
Hey, Paul, I just wonder, was there any look at the digital advertising and all? Like, and again, it's somewhat controversial. People don't like the digital pop-up ads that you see on rink boards during hockey games. Any research into that?
You know what? We have not delved into it, but I've been, obviously as a big consumer of wide variety of sports, it's in your face, it's obvious, it's actually quite slick in a lot of cases. It doesn't bother me. I obviously notice those rink boards and advertisements. I think a lot of that is monetized through the broadcaster.
Right.
And it's part of a TV ad sale where the extension of that value is rink board exposure. So I think it'd be really good to know how much value advertisers perceive on those sort of digital executions versus the broader sponsorship in a linear TV ad, for example. I have not seen data that shows sort of perceived value of each, but I think that's a very good question.
Yeah, and I think if you're a sports franchise, I mean, you're constantly looking for new ways to drive revenue. And again, for people that are Blue Jay fans in this country, I mean, the reason why the Blue Jays are able to go out and really attack the free agent market and put the team they put together to get within, literally a run of winning the World Series last year is because of those advertising campaigns and the in-venue experience and the crowds. And so it's a highly competitive environment now for getting dollars, and I think digital is just giving them an additional opportunity to find new revenue streams.
Yeah, and I think if you take the Jays for example, the however you consume the game or the highlights or communicate with your friend network on what's happening in the World Series, a lot of that is surrounded by tons of opportunities to monetize the audience in various forms of advertising and sponsorship. So, and obviously Rogers' position with the Jays is very strong in terms of its ownership in Sportsnet and various other digital properties as well tied to the Jays. So I think, it's still fresh for me watching that Jays run. You said come within a run of winning the World Series. I think, it's more like with inches is the way I look at
Yeah.
it. If you know the play that I'm thinking about. But so yeah, but that run by the Jays, if the Maple Leafs in Toronto ever did something similar, it would be a similar phenomenon, at least in the GTA and parts of Ontario. But yeah, it was pretty special, and I think brands were really flocking to figure out how to get attached to the momentum that was happening with the Jays all summer and into the fall.
Yeah, in terms of betting, Paul, it's interesting. We had John Levy on the podcast back in November, and the Score did that deal with the Blue Jays when the Ontario market opened in 2022, and John said that the Score took some criticism at the time for spending too much money on that partnership. And man, oh man, I mean that's pretty good brand exposure for the Score bet when you have playoff games almost every second night and 40,000 plus people sitting in a stadium. I think that's a deal. I think that turned out pretty well for that brand.
Yeah, it certainly did, and that's an example of a domestic operator who's competing in a landscape with U.S. players and European players. So it's a busy, fragmented market, but for the score bet to have that high exposure was definitely a win.
Paul, another an interesting part for me of the report too is this live sports viewership, and we see what's going on with digital and streaming now, and leagues are coming up with different ways to do their rights deals, and and with the NHL now, we're seeing games on Amazon Prime on Monday nights for the Canadian teams. We're seeing what the NFL's, having Netflix do games over the Christmas holidays, and again, trying to squeeze as much juice out of the lemon as possible. That said, we're really still at a time where cable still is king in live sports viewership, even though digital's catching up. And the report mentions that more than a third of sports fans still rely on traditional TV, and then nearly half, I guess, is a mix of streaming and cable. Is there anything from that part of the survey that really stood out to you?
Yeah, I think it felt about right. I think, again, this is a story of age demographics and who's consuming it. We have forecasts for eMarketer has forecasts for cord cutters in Canada. So the number of cord cutter households or cord never households. So a household that's never had a cable subscription. And we see that rising on a continual basis. And we see pay TV households declining. It's still very substantial pay TV households, but we're seeing a fragmentation of how people consume content, whether it's sports or not. So that just, and again, that divides along age lines, I think. So Gen Z, if you split that question into Gen Z versus Gen X, you're going to see, probably favors streaming over cable TV. So again, so what does that mean? That means over time, and as Monday Night Hockey on Prime Video is an example, as you mentioned, as Friday Night Baseball on Apple TV, the Netflix for Christmas and the NFL, all those examples, and even wider rollouts of streamers, broadcasting sports. I think that's just going to continue to grow. But I still think that's pretty far in the future. I think it's definitely moving that way, but I think the cable operators still have a very strong position. And you can see that they are digitizing their strategies in a lot of ways to monetize that behavior that's obvious to everybody.
I'm hoping you can maybe just flesh it out a little bit more, but there's a sentence in the report around cable, Paul, that says, quote, streaming services like Amazon Prime benefit from bundling, while domestic players like Sportsnet and TSN lead on content but lag in scale. What's that mean exactly?
I think that is really related to the apps that are available, the OTT apps that are available from both TSN and Sportsnet, not garnering really substantial audiences at this point in time. I think it's been a slow transition from cable consumption of Sportsnet content to pure OTT consumption of that content. So I think that is really what sticks out to me. And I think that, that's simply a matter of time. I think that's going to continue to grow. It's probably going to manifest in different ways in terms of how these apps are branded and bundled. So I think that will change over time. But I think it relates to the relative lack of adoption of those apps that came from both, from Bell and Rogers at this point in time.
Right. And I guess, again, for my generation, I'm probably going to have a cable package until the day they put me in a box or an urn. And that, I think that's probably true of everyone in my generation. But again, that's not that far down the road. I mean, I think watching the evolution of cable over the next 25 years will be fascinating.
Yeah, it certainly will. I think, the other thing that we have to consider here is the device that people consume sports on. I can honestly say, and this is probably related to my age as well, is I have not watched a live sports event on my phone. It's just not something that I will sit down and do, or even if I'm on the go. I don't typically commute. So, and when, if you're commuting, it's probably not when a game's on too. So I don't, for me, it's a big screen. It could be coming in through a streamed connection, or it could be through a cable connection, which I still have. But yeah, I think the device connected TV, like the smart TV adoption in Canada, so coming from the OEM with a built-in internet connection is like about half of total shipments in Canada, or half of households have a smart TV. So that makes easy access to streaming available to a lot of households in Canada, which is another sort of device-centric view into the whole trend that's happening.
I think access is a key word too, Paul. It's
Yeah.
interesting when I heard you talking about watching a game on your phone. Like I remember, 2012, when people say we'll be watching games on your phone someday, I thought, well, that's insane. And I heard a senior sports executive in this country make the same comment at a sports business conference in like 2013. And a year later, I'm sitting in the Sochi airport, flying back from a sports media conference, and I'm watching a Leafs game on my phone. I remember the Blue Jays run in 2016, taking the GO train home from Yahoo, and listening to not being able to watch a game on my phone, but being able to listen to MLB.com radio broadcast with, I think, Dan Schulman and Buck Martinez. So I think access is a key thing. I think if there is access to watching a game on your phone, people will do that if there's not another option.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure. And you're right, access is key. And I think choice, like, whatever your situation, it could be in your living room with the big screen, or it could be on the GO train with your phone. And I think everybody understands that, a variety of options for the experience is important.
I'd love to get your thoughts too, Paul, before we let you go, just on, since day one in Ontario, I think sports betting operators have tried to find the secret sauce, and working with media companies to figure out how you can promote your brand, provide sports betting content, and not offend traditional sports consumers who either aren't betting, or, as report points out, it might be someone who are, they're betting once or twice a week, but they're not betting every day of the week. And I think there's been a bit of an evolution where at the beginning, Sportsnet invested pretty heavily in betting, brought in a social media team at the beginning, had a kind of a dedicated campaign that went away. FanDuel's been invested heavily with TSN at the beginning of the Ontario market, and I think there's a lot of good success with that partnership, and they've done some smart things. Although there will be an element again who will tell you they get tired of the ads, and they don't want it. They don't want someone talking about a money line on a Cowboys Eagles game. But just any thoughts from you on just kind of, has there been an evolution in terms of how media companies and sports betting operators work together?
I think so. I think the rights holders for these leagues are taking their direction from the leagues themselves, which I think are pointing in the direction of greater integration with this type of content, money line content, prop bet content in sports programming. Like I think you mentioned FanDuel and TSN. If their flagship drive time show on 1050 is Overdrive, and there's a lot of content around the NFL and money lines, and so it's integrated into the show in terms of the content that's presented. And I think that for a lot of people, I think that is welcomed, because it helps them inform their bets if they are a sports bettor. For me, I'll give you my. I don't sports bet. I do listen to a lot of content and consume a lot of sports content. The appearance of money lines and odds, etc., on a variety of sports in my programming, it doesn't offend me. I just see it as sort of a natural evolution of how leagues operate and how sports rights holders monetize those rights, and monetize sponsorships that are paying the bills. So again, for some people who are offended, it could be a limited part of the audience, but overall, I think it's not a surprise to anybody to see, with what's happened in Ontario the last few years, what's happened with leagues and their embrace of sports betting as part of the fan experience overall. I think it's natural, and I think we're not going to see it, change. It will evolve, I think, but it's not going to change much from what we see right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I've mentioned it, Dale Hooper, who's manages FanDuel Canada. There are some things, I think the Mystic Mike or Mike Johnson segments where he makes a bet, those are kind of fun. And again, as someone who is like a $1-2 better, I'll usually, if I'm watching a TSN game of Mike Johnson, I'll listen to his segment with James Duthie, and I'll bet $2 on whatever Mike Johnson's parlay is that night. And I think the strength in numbers segments that Megan Chayka has done for TSN around hockey is, again, it's using data to tell a story, and at the end of it, if there is some betting information there, if you're inclined to place a wager. But I think there are some smart ways to take that data that's being provided to odds makers and turn into some decent storytelling for a sports media outlet.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the storyline for sure. And those segments that you mentioned are great examples of, I think it is a challenge when you've got wall to wall coverage of a sport. Just think about, I don't obviously, think about like trade deadline day. Like, both networks are on for 6-8 hours or whatever it is. Trying to fill that is a challenge, right? I think not necessarily if for trade, but overall, if you've got a 2-hour show or whatever, content and original content that speaks to the audience is always sort of a challenge. And I think this betting framework, or this betting sort of framing or context, or telling people what the potentials are for the outcomes, I think that is natural evolution of the content on those shows.
Hey, Paul, just quickly to finish, one thing I found, one of the most fascinating things I found in this report was on the merchandise spend. And I'll mention it because we have a WNBA team coming to Toronto this spring. But the report, the results of the report was that the WNBA fans spend the most money on merchandise. And that the CFL was right in there as well, ahead of Major League Baseball and the NHL.
Yeah, so basically, it was the data was the average annual merchandise spend for fans of each league, and as you're right, the WNBA was tops. CFL was ahead of those other leagues you mentioned. I think the way I thought about it, I think in the case of the WNBA, there's probably a lot of pent up sort of demand for this type of sport and content. So for girls, women, and families who are interested in women's sport who have not bought merchandise from the WNBA or the PWHL before, there's a lot of potential new spending that can happen, sort of catching up with MLB and NHL. I think if you think of NHL and MLB, people have been spending on merchandise for those leagues all their lives in many cases, right? So I think in the case, and in the CFL, I think it's probably a more national view. So if you look at Western Canada,
Right.
what's happening with the CFL in Western Canada, probably a lot more spending there. So it is, I think it's the maturity of MLB, NHL in this market. And people don't, they already have their, Oilers shirt if they're in Edmonton or whatever. They don't need to buy one every year.
Hey, Paul, just the last question. Just, given the report and the data that was collected by Vividata in 2025, and given what we talked about off the top about the year ahead in sports and beginning with the Winter Olympics, like, is there something that you're looking for, like looking at a trend or a prediction, like just given this is going to be, I think one of the greatest sports years in our lifetime, especially with the World Cup coming to Canada. Is there something that you're really focusing on?
I think, in our trends report, so each year we do a trend report looking ahead to the year ahead. And in 2026, one of those trends was talking about how lucrative the sports audience is and the flow of ad dollars into sports in 2026 will be higher this year than in a normal year. So I think in terms of moving the needle on sports share of total advertising in a segment, I think we're going to see it really move in 2026 because of those massive events that you mentioned, Olympics, FIFA World Cup, as well as all the sort of regular sort of North American leagues and European leagues that are happening on an ongoing basis.
Paul Briggs is the principal analyst for Canada for eMarketer. Hey, Paul, is there a place that, like, is this report available? Can companies access this report somehow, or what would be, or if they have some questions and want to speak with you or somebody else, is there a way to reach out to you?
Sure. So our reports are for subscribers only. But there is a summary of the report on emarketer.com. There's a public website where you can see a sort of a high level view of what the report covers. And on that page, there's ways to get in touch with the eMarketer team to dig into a more a subscription scenario. But yeah, a lot of our content, obviously with LinkedIn, we're putting out synopses of reports that we do. So there's, Paul Briggs on LinkedIn, you'll see me cover all the reports that we do. I'll have a synopsis of what the main findings were and where we were going in that report. But generally speaking, emarketer.com will be where you go to learn more.
Hey, Paul, and I'll include a link to that in the Substack post as well, to the eMarketer website. Listen, this was terrific. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for your time. And listen, enjoy the Olympics and enjoy the Super Bowl and the World Cup this summer.
Great. Thanks, Steve. It was great to be here.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. As always, you can listen to this podcast on all of the different podcast apps. You can also watch my interview with Paul on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. Thanks for everybody for listening and watching to this show, and we will see everybody again very, very soon.